to let you know we're recording. Okay. All right. Thanks everybody so much for joining us for workshop number 2. I am Julie Wood with Charles River Watershed Association. I am the Deputy Director here and working with the team to put on this workshop series. So our topics for today are non-structural controls and private BMPs. We really want to get right into it. So we're gonna just quickly have some welcome and introductory remarks, followed by our technical presentation, which will once again be done by our partners at Brown & Caldwell. And then we have a nice panel today joining us, a good mix of folks from Charles River communities talking about their experience with this topic, sharing their experience with this topic, which we hope will blossom into a discussion and maybe raise some questions that we can also put on the agenda for our Q&A with DEP and EPA. And we hope to wrap up at 3 o'clock. I didn't cover the Zoom. I guess I didn't cover the Zoom logistics, but we have a chat. I have my colleague. Yeah, we have a chat. So if you have any technical issues, and then raise hand or Q&A feature. Raise hand is under reactions. I know sometimes people who aren't regular Zoomers have trouble finding that. And then if you have your hand raised, we will know you have a question, and you can just unmute and ask it yourself. Thanks, Stephanie. All right, so this is a project team. I already introduced myself. I'm joined by my colleague, Julia Hopkins. She's helping with some of the Zoom technical support. And then we also have our great partner team from Brown & Caldwell, Matt Davis, who I will turn it over to momentarily. Stephanie Alamina, who is facilitating the screen share, and Andrew Goldberg. So I mentioned this workshop is part of a series. Hopefully you all joined for workshop 1 or checked out the video if you weren't able to. So yeah, we really went into it with load calculations in workshop 1. Workshop 2 today, we're going to address, as I said, non-structural controls and private BMPs. Workshop 3, which is our final workshop that's really kind of presentation focused, will focus on public BMPs, or those BMPs that cities and towns are going to plan and put in themselves. And that is on May 10th. Hopefully everybody can join for that. The registration is via our website, and then you'll get a Zoom link just like you did today. And then our final online workshop is, like I said, this question and answer with the regulators. They have asked that as much as possible, people submit questions in advance just so they can be prepared and provide the best information. So if you already have a question on that for them that you'd like addressed at that event, you can also put that in through our website, and then we'll have a list of questions to share with them ahead of time. Next slide. This is something I have emailed many of you about, but I just wanted to put a final plug here. In addition to the workshops, a key piece of this project is to compile and share with you some cost information on BMP construction costs. So I know that's a big concern of everyone, is the cost of complying with this permit. And as you're doing your planning, having as best you can, having a really concrete understanding of what that will cost your community is an important piece. So for this element of the project, we're asking you guys to share with us any cost information you have about BMP construction. If you have, maybe the town put something in, maybe you, have a private entity in your community that put something in that you have information about or could share information about. trying to make this as easy as we can as far as not super onerous on you guys to share this information. So we have it through a few options. We have an Excel-based template. If you just have some files, a few of you have already done this, you had some files that you just passed along to us for us to comb through. Or if you'd rather just get on the phone with a member of our team, we can also set that up. And we're hoping to get all that information by Friday so that we can compile it and then share it back with you in a format that is useful to you at our next workshop on May 10th. So obviously we need a little time to do that. So that's why we're putting out this call for cost data. All right, and with that, I will hand it over to you, Matt.
Okay, thanks, Julie, appreciate it. All right, so I'm Matt Davis with Brown Caldwell. Glad to be here with you today to talk about the phosphorus control planning. Thought we'd start off with just kind of like an overview of what we're doing here. You're probably here because you have a phosphorus load reduction requirement. The way that you meet that requirement is through the implementation of stormwater controls and then getting credit for those controls. And the credits that you can get are for non-structural BMPs. We're going to be talking about that today. You can also get credits for structural BMPs on private property. And then there are also, you can get credit for structural BMPs on public properties. And so the workshops are really structured around addressing each of these topics. The first topic that we talked about in workshop 1 was talking about the load reduction requirements and the development of those base loads. That workshop was recorded, the slides and the presentations available through the link at the bottom of the screen. And I think Julie also sent out that link. So workshop 2, as Julie mentioned, we're going to be focusing on the non-structural credits and the credits for structural BMPs on private property. And one thing that I wanted to kind of say at the start is that there's a technical piece to this presentation, especially on the non-structural BMPs. I want to talk a little bit about how the permit lays those out and what the requirements are. As we get into some of the issues related to the structural BMPs on private property, we're going to talk about what the permit says that you need to do. But in terms of like how those requirements are going to be achieved, I think there's a lot up in the air still. There's a lot of tracking that's required of private property BMPs, and you need to gather a lot of information. And a lot of communities are probably going to do that in different ways. In fact, I don't think a lot of people have really figured all of that out yet. So we're excited to have the workshop panelists here today to kind of help share their perspectives on this from different, the different ways that communities are looking at. And I don't think anyone's really progressed super far on all of these things, but it'll be really interesting to hear what they're talking about. And so, so I'm excited this workshop is kind of a combination of us with the communities really talking about the whole range of issues that are coming up. So next slide, Stephanie. So what I'd like to do is start off with just talking about these different credits. First, wanted to talk about the non-structural BMP phosphorus credits and kind of give you an idea of sort of like how this fits into your overall phosphorus control plan, and particularly relative to the other kind of credits that you might be seeking. So non-structural BMPs are typically the most cost-effective way to meet your phosphorus reduction requirements. A lot of times these are things that you're already doing and you just need to get credit for them. The permit provides credits for street sweeping, catch basin cleaning, and what they call enhanced organic waste and leaf litter collection. Unfortunately, these credits are limited. They're not going to help you meet your full requirement. Hopefully they'll help a little bit. And by the way, any little bit helps a lot. I mean, because removing phosphorus is expensive. And so if you can do it cost effectively and get credit for things that you're already doing, then that's a really good situation. So the map on the right here is a map of street right-of-ways in Millis. So these are the kinds of areas that are available for these credits. You can see it's not like a big percentage of the total area. So like I said, the credits are limited. They're also a little limited in the way that EPA has set them up, though that may change a little bit in the next permit, and I'll talk about that some too. Okay, next slide, Stephanie, thank you. So another thing that we're going to be talking about today are structural BMPs on private properties. You can see from the map on the right-hand side here, again, this is Millis. This shows all the privately owned land there. So you can just see visually, there's a lot more opportunity to get to do things because there's just more land available. But the question is, how do you get structural BMPs implemented on private properties? By the way, you can get credit for those, but you have to track. You have to keep track of all the information related to those, the information that went into information about the BMPs, and then also related to the O&M. And some communities, well, most communities require that new development or redevelopment implement BMPs depending upon like different requirements, that maybe the size of the disturbance or the types of changes that are taking place. So that's one way that you can get private properties to property owners to implement structural BMPs, but they can also be incentivized, like through stormwater utilities. You could offer a credit if people, install maybe a dry well, or maybe a rain garden or a catch basin. I mean, so it can be incentivized. So one of the things we're going to talk about is like, how can you get private property owners to implement the BMPs? And then we're also going to talk a bit about how you track that information. One thing that, and we're hoping the panelists can talk a little bit about this too, and how the communities are thinking about approaching this. There are definitely some challenges with tracking all this information. I think we're still trying to figure out how, what's the easiest way for people to do that. Okay, next slide. Okay, the last category of credits that we're going to talk about are structural BMPs on municipally owned properties. You can see from the map here on the right, it's showing municipally owned properties in Millis along with the street right-of-ways. These are places where structural BMPs could be implemented on private properties. It's a lot more limited than it is on the private side, but the good thing about the public side is that you have more control of those properties. One of the negative sides is that you have to pay for those. As the permittee, you're typically going to be paying for BMPs on public properties. And they can be fairly expensive. And we're still trying to collect more data from the communities on the BMP cost. And we hope that you'll submit information that you have. We'd love to compile that and be able to summarize that for you. But what we've seen in some of the planning studies that we've done is that the cost in terms of removal of phosphorus through structural BMPs is on the order of maybe, on the low side, maybe $20,000 per pound of phosphorus removed. And that's like really, really cost effective. And it goes upwards to 100,000 pounds or more pretty quickly. And this is in, heavily urbanized areas. So just trying to give some context, we'll be talking more about cost coming up, but just to kind of give you a feel for sort of what kind of costs we're talking about, they're pretty significant. And one of the things as we move through the discussions a little bit later, we're going to be talking about some of the requirements that are that will be some of the requirements for getting credits for private property BMPs. It might require you to collect new information from developers, to track it, to get inspection information. Like all of this stuff is can be time consuming and resource intensive. And one of the things that and I've heard people express some concerns about that. One of the things that comes to mind in those discussions is just the cost of doing this phosphorus control implementation, and that it is going to be pretty expensive. And even though it might be resource intensive to collect all of that BMP information, it's still pretty cost effective compared to construction of new BMPs. So Hopefully we can talk about that a little bit more later. Okay, next slide, Stephanie. Okay, so now we're going to get into a discussion about the credits for the non-structural BMPs. As I mentioned, there's 3 different credits that are offered right now through the MS4 permit: street sweeping, catch basin cleaning, and enhanced organic waste and leaf litter collection. And I'll go into some detail on each of those. And there's also a couple of other potential credits in the future. I'll talk about those just a little bit. One of those is related to the fertilizer ban that's in place, or the phosphorus, the usage of phosphorus in fertilizers, and also potentially an IDD credit. Oh, and by the way, I just wanted to mention that there's, in the phosphorus control plan template, section 1.6 provides information related to the non-structural credits. So that might be helpful to you. Okay, next slide. Thanks, Stephanie. Okay, so let's talk about street sweeping first. So the phosphorus credit, I pasted in the formula here from the permit. The phosphorus credit for street sweeping is calculated by taking the impervious area swept, multiplying that by the phosphorus loading export rate for your impervious areas, and then multiplying that by the phosphorus reduction factor that you get for sweeping, and you multiply that by the annual frequency factor. Okay, so basically, these first 2 terms here, you use these to calculate what your phosphorus load is on the streets that you're sweeping. So this is the impervious area times that phosphorus loading export rate. And we talked quite a bit about this in workshop 1 and how the loads are calculated. Basically, we're just calculating the loads on the streets here. Then what we do is we multiply that by these 2 reduction factors that give you your credit. Now the PRF is a function of how often you sweep and what kind of equipment that you use to sweep. And one thing I like about this credit is that the credit varies depending upon the nature of your street sweeping program. If you do more, or if you sweep more often, or you use equipment that's more efficient, then you get a higher credit, which is really nice because it sort of provides an incentive for doing more street sweeping. And like I said, this is typically tends to be pretty cost effective. So you can determine the PRF factor from table 2.4 here. And the annual frequency factor is basically a factor that says what percentage of the year you sweep. If you sweep 12 months out of the year, it's a factor of 1. And if you sweep less than that, it's just a fraction of the year you sweep. For example, if you sweep 9 months out of the year, it's 9 divided by 12, you get that factor would be 0.75. So one thing that's kind of nice about the way this is set up is that you can do some cost-effective analysis. You can look at if I went from sweeping monthly to weekly, how much phosphorus credit could I get for that? And then you can look at the cost that you would incur to do that, and you can do an analysis to determine if that's cost effective. Also, if you've got equipment, like maybe using mechanical broom sweepers now, maybe you're going to be retiring some of that equipment in the next few years. You could look to see, look into the possibility of maybe stepping up to maybe a vacuum assisted sweeper or a high efficiency regenerative air sweeper. But with the way that the credit's set up, it makes it pretty easy to look at and do a cost analysis. Okay, next slide, please. So when you do the street sweeping credits, you need to have a streets GIS layer. I presume everybody's got that. And what you want is an edge of pavement layer so that you're working with polygons and not polylines. And you want the polygons because you need to be able to calculate the areas. If for some reason you don't have a polygon layer of your streets, you can take the Mass GIS, Mass DOT roads layer, and you can convert that from, that's a street center line layer, but you can convert it over to a polygon layer by doing some buffering, because that layer provides a street width attribute. So you can generate polygons from that. If anybody needs help with that, just let me know. Be happy to talk you through that. But once you have that, you want to begin breaking your streets layer into different segments that are based on the equipment type and the sweeping frequency. And I just put a little figure down here at the bottom that shows what this might look like for some streets where we've got a mechanical broom that sweeps weekly, 12 months out of the year. And those are the streets shown in blue here. And then the orange lines are streets that are swept with a mechanical broom, but they're swept monthly. So we want to begin to sort of categorize the streets into these different categories. Okay, next slide. Once we do that, we need to figure out what is the phosphorus loading export rate that we should use. And I just put the equation for the phosphorus credit back up at the top here. So we want to multiply the impervious area times that phosphorus loading export rate to find out what the loads are on the streets. And then we can use the PRF and the AF factors to basically multiply by that to figure out what our credit is. Well, the phosphorus loading export rate, it depends on what the value that you use is going to depend upon the land use data source that you use. You may have your own land use data. If not, you can get land use data from MassGIS. MassGIS has data from 2005, which was used for the original baseline phosphorus load calculations for the Charles River communities in the 2016 MS4 permit. MassGIS also has a 2016 land use layer too. And if you use the 2016 MassGIS land use data, or even your own, because it's probably going to be pretty similar to that MassGIS land use data, you want to use a phosphorus loading export rate of 1.95 pounds per acre per year. Now, one thing that I wanted to point out is this value is not in the permit. This value is in the document with the hyperlink here. This was some guidance provided by MassDEP. And MassDEP developed this document to help communities do phosphorus load calculations using this updated land use, 2016 land use data. Because I mentioned the stuff that's in the permit is really geared towards the 2005 land use data. Okay, so just to underscore that again, if you're doing, if you're calculating your street streaking credit using 2016 MassGIS land use data, you want to use a phosphorus loading export rate of 1.95 pounds per acre per year. And the way they came up with this value is it's really a composite value calculated from the impervious areas in the Charles River watershed, excluding agricultural and forested areas. So it's really sort of a composite based on typical land uses. Now, if you want to do this using the 2005 MassGIS land use data, you can do that too. It's a little bit more involved. And the approach that you use is similar to what we talked about in workshop 1, where we calculate the baseline phosphorus loads. Except in this case, you're only going to be calculating the baseline phosphorus loads for the streets. So a couple of things that I want, if you go this route, that I wanted to just point out to you. Streets don't have their own land use code. Well, let me say that a little bit differently. The MS4 permit defines phosphorus loading export rates for different types of land uses. And streets don't have their own specific land use code. Highways do, but streets aren't highways in the way that things are set up. Highways are highways, but regular streets really take on the land use from their surrounding areas. So if you have streets in commercial areas, that street's going to have a commercial land use. So if you do this, process, use the 2005 GIS land use data, you need to intersect that GIS data with your street segments to create a new set of polygons of just your streets with each street segment with a different type of land use associated with it. And then you can use the tables provided in the the 2016 MS4 permit to calculate those loads. They've got a table that allows you to translate the land use codes to the phosphorus loading export rates. And then they've got a table that have those rates. If anybody wants to do this, I recommend referring back to the workshop 1 presentation. I can also provide more detail in the questions if you want to talk about this a little bit more. Or you could also contact me too. I'd be happy to talk you through this. Okay, next slide. Okay, catch basin cleaning is the next credit that I'll talk about here. So to be eligible for this credit, you need to clean your catch basin such that your minimum sump storage capacity is maintained at 50% throughout the year. And the areas, the impervious areas that are available for this credit are essentially streets, maybe your municipal lots. This might be a point of contention. For some folks may want to try to include other directly connected impervious areas. And I certainly think, you might be able to make a case for that, but EPA's intention is that the areas eligible for these, the impervious areas eligible for these credits are principally streets. So the calculation for this is pretty easy. It's your impervious area, which is principally going to be the streets, multiplied by the phosphorus loading export rates that we just talked about a minute ago for streets, multiplied by this phosphorus reduction factor for catch basin cleaning. And that's going to be a value of 0.02. One thing that I kind of wish they had done with the catch basin credit is to provide maybe a little bit more incentive to optimize your catch basin cleaning program. If you do a lot of cleaning, you don't necessarily get more credit than if you're just kind of hitting that minimum threshold. So unlike the street sweeping credit, which is incentivized to encourage you to do more, this one isn't quite structured that way. But it's a pretty straightforward, but it's pretty straightforward to calculate. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the next credit is the enhanced organic waste and leaf litter collection. And essentially there's some details related to being able to get this credit, but essentially if you sweep from September 1st to December 1st, you're potentially eligible for this credit. It's related to sweeping of roadways and parking lots. And what it's trying to get you to do is to gather and remove your landscaping waste and organic debris and leaf matter, promptly after landscaping activities. And this is almost it's really almost an additional street sweeping credit, it seems to me at least. You calculate it by multiplying the impervious area where the leaf litter collection is occurring. And then you multiply the phosphorus loading export rate for those areas. And you multiply that by a factor of 0.05. So again, this impervious area times the phosphorus loading export rate, that's just basically the load, the phosphorus load for those areas. And then you're multiplying it by this credit factor. And again, these impervious areas are principally going to be your streets again, or your municipal parking lots too. Okay, next slide. Okay, wanted to talk briefly just about a couple of additional credits that may be coming up in a future permit. In 2012, Massachusetts enacted a law limiting the usage of phosphorus fertilizers. In response to that, EPA included a phosphorus credit in the 2014 draft MS4 permit. And the tables you see over here on the right are actually from that draft permit. But the credits weren't actually included in the 2016 MS4 permit. But it's likely that they will be included in the next permit. And I think EPA is still trying to figure out how they want to incorporate those. But it does sound like there will be a fertilizer credit. And by the way, I forgot to mention this when we were talking about the street sweeping. There are going to probably be changes to the street sweeping credit also. And it's probably going to go up. EPA is paying attention to some research that's going on that's suggesting that street sweeping is more effective at removing phosphorus than was originally thought. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there, but it looks like that might be a possibility that the credits are going to go up for street sweeping. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, another one that could be coming potentially somewhere down the road is an IDDE credit. And so the idea here is, sewage has quite a bit of phosphorus, has relatively high phosphorus concentration. So if you're removing sewage from your storm drains, you're removing phosphorus also. And what EPA has said is that 10 years into the implementation of the permit, they're going to review IDDE reductions or illicit source reductions through IDDE programs. And at that time, make an assessment of what kind of an IDDE credit they want to distribute. And what I'm hearing is that they may not necessarily distribute that credit based on in proportion to the amount that you've removed. So, and I think the reasoning for that, as I understand it, is EPA doesn't want to reward communities that have been that have neglected their IDDE programs and are, all of a sudden becoming very active in them and rewarding them because of that. So, I think they recognize that there have been communities that have been working in the past to remove illicit sources from their systems, and they want to somehow allocate things so those communities get credits also for what they've done in the past. So it's a little bit yet to be determined quite how this is going to pan out, but this credit could potentially be pretty significant, and it was in the draft permit. And if they continue along those lines, it could be one of the, perhaps one of the bigger credits that are available. Okay, next slide. So I think that we wanted to take a pause here for a minute, Julia, for a poll question, I believe. Do you want to, Julie, do you want to?
Sure, yeah. Thanks for all that, Matt. All right, so hopefully everybody's seen the poll. I see some questions coming in. Pretty simple. Have you made any changes to your street sweeping or catch basin cleaning program as a result of the permit? Let's see, about half of you have responded. I'll give it maybe 10 more seconds. Last call. All right, Julia, do you want to show us the results? All right, so hopefully everybody can see the results. Most of you, a little more than 50% said yes. So that's great. I think that tells us that in line with what Matt is saying, these are relatively cost-effective things you're already doing, and maybe just changing your schedule a little bit or investing in some new equipment lets you maximize those credits. Because our second highest answer, no, but we plan to. So yeah, a lot of you are making changes. Great. We have one more poll, but we'll wait till later to run that one. Thanks, Julia.
So it looks like we've got some good questions in the chat. I think we're going to hold those probably until the end, if that's okay. But I look forward to answering these after we've gotten through the presentation. And now I'd like to hand it over to Stephanie, who's going to go into the next part of our technical presentation here.
Thanks, Matt. So yeah, I'm going to talk about structural BMPs on private properties. And if I can get this to move. Okay, so before diving too far in, just a reminder on what types of structural BMPs are eligible through the permit right now. Similar to what Matt was talking about with which non-structural credits, there's specific BMPs that are eligible for structural credits, and those are listed here. These are pulled out of Appendix F, Attachment 3 of the permit. So there's just some examples: rain gardens, bioinfiltration, sand filters, porous pavement, and there's more descriptions on each of them in the Stormwater Handbook, which I'm linking at the bottom right of this slide. I'm going to break up this presentation into this part of the presentation into four main components. But before I dive in, I think Matt talked about this at the beginning, but just wanted to remind everyone, there's a lot of opportunity, obviously, for private property structural BMPs due to the amount of land that's privately owned. But with that comes a lot of maintenance, a lot of data, and a lot of stuff to keep track of. And so the point of this is that I don't think any one person has all the answers right now, but we're going to try and walk through kind of what the major components are, what the things that we think we should be thinking about are, what's in the permit, and then the panel discussion will be an opportunity to share for some resource sharing. We're not claiming that anyone has a perfect private BMP program that they're going to share and illuminate everything for us at the end of this, but it's more an opportunity for discussion and for questions and to kind of put our heads together to talk about what things we need to be thinking about and what are some of those roadblocks and how do we break through them. So I'm going to talk through kind of four major components. First being the data needs. So what is the actual physical information that you need to get a credit for a structural BMP on private property? The second being the mechanism. So how do you get that information from private property owners or private developers? The third being kind of the flip side of that. In what format or who is receiving the data, what department, what are the logistics of getting that data? And then the last piece is you have all this data, how do you manage it? So first talking about the data needs. I'm going to break this into two major components for a structural BMP on private property. First is the design information, so actually calculating what you need to calculate the load reduction. And the second piece is the O&M certification, which is a whole other subset of data that you're going to need to gather to keep claiming credit for a BMP. If you recall, for those of you who are at Workshop 1, we talked a lot about how to calculate the loads, both for baseline and for updating to current conditions, the different things you need in terms of the directly connected impervious area, the pervious area, the land uses, the soil types. It's all the same sort of principles for the data you need to calculate a credit for private BMPs, and I've broken it out into three different kind of stages. So if you have this is just an example BMP and an example private property. So if you have a property on the left side, this is just before development. And then in the middle, you have redevelopment. They added an extra half of a house here and a bunch of impervious area by virtue of the driveway. And they also added a BMP of a dry pond. And then the last piece is kind of looking at the characteristics of the BMP itself. So for each of these three components, you're going to need your directly connected impervious area and the land use types associated with every part of the directly connected impervious area, the disconnected impervious area. So for example, in this schematic, the left-hand schematic, there's like a little hypothetical shed in the corner. So that would be disconnected. And then the pervious area, so all the green space on these schematics, and the land use type and the hydrologic soil groups for the entire project area or drainage area boundary for these three pieces. And then the last piece you need is actually to claim your credit. You're going to have to know some information about the BMP, so what the BMP type is, what the drainage area is, and then for different BMPs, you're going to need different performance characteristics. So for infiltration trenches, you'll need an infiltration rate. For porous pavement, you'll need depth of media, that kind of stuff. And just a comment on why we're breaking it up into three whole different pieces. Like we talked about in Workshop 1, when you're updating things to current conditions, you're going to have to, through the permit every year, keep track of changes in land use and impervious area, impervious cover. So this is one way to do that and kind of push some of that to the private entity. So if they're adding impervious cover, you're going to need to account for that because it's going to change the phosphorus load on that site. And then the drainage area boundary in the right-hand one, that's going to be how you know what the phosphorus load is that's draining to your BMP and therefore what the credit is going to be based off of. So that was for the actual load information to get your BMP credit or to calculate your BMP credit. The other piece of information that you're going to need from all your private BMPs is going to be your O&M certification. And I'm going to dive into this in a bit more detail during the data receiving section, because that's kind of where the rubber hits the road on this piece. But essentially you need proof of inspection or date of last maintenance, and you need to basically confirm that your BMPs are operating as they were originally designed and in accordance with your manufacturer or design specifications. And these are just some pictures here of some examples of functioning BMPs versus non-functioning BMPs. So there's a lot of resources from different communities that show to kind of help private property owners know, if they're inspecting a BMP, oh, this is working, this is not, and here's what I have to do about it. Okay, so that's all the information you need. The next question is, how do you get it? And there's two main ways, and Matt kind of hinted at this earlier in his part of the conversation, of you can either require it or incentivize it. So we're going to talk through those two pieces. First being the requirements. So through the MS4 permit, you already have development and redevelopment requirements. For anything over an acre is the permit of land disturbance is the permits requirement. There's an opportunity to maybe enhance that and change that size limitation and dial it in a little bit more and make a smaller size trigger if you want to capture more properties. Of course, there's going to be a trade-off of sorts with how small you go and then how many properties are going to then have to go through this process and how much, again, data you're going to have to manage. So there's probably a bit of an optimization there on what's the size constraint that's going to give us the bang for our buck of how much data we're going to have coming in versus how many credits we can get out of that information. And then just some resources. There's a lot of different places that have regulatory language updates and recommendations for people. So CRWA has some enhanced stormwater regulation recommended language that they published in 2021. The Northern Middlesex Stormwater Collaborative has some bylaw and ordinance and regulation language, and so does the Neponset Stormwater Partnership. The other piece is incentivizing BMPs. So there are different ways you can, instead of making people do it, you can reward them for doing it or make them want to do it. I'm linking a resource from EPA in 2009 that kind of walks through these 5 major bullets that I have here in a little more detail. And I mean, it's a little old, it's from 2009, but it has a lot of examples of communities that are implementing any range of these items. So I'm going to talk through stormwater utility on the next slide. So I'll dive a little bit more into that one in a second. You can have development incentives, things like expedited permitting or zoning upgrades as ways to incentivize adding in BMPs. You can have grant programs, rebates, installation financing. You can do tax credits or something like that through the rebate program, awards and recognition programs. There's a lot of different, they're all similar, but there are different mechanisms to incentivize BMPs. And another piece of this that I wanted to talk about quickly was that you have an opportunity to incorporate things like equity and resiliency into how you develop an incentive program, or probably even bylaws or regulations, but you can have development incentives in specific geographic areas targeting disadvantaged communities or based on your environmental justice populations. You could have specific rebates for specific BMP types that do a really good job addressing co-benefits of flood mitigation or climate resiliency. So there are opportunities to make all of this effort worth it for more than just achieving the PCP goals. It can achieve your larger community goals, hopefully too. And then just a quick chat on stormwater utility and how you can use that and leverage that to achieve your phosphorus control requirements, and specifically with private BMPs. A utility is a way to fund a stormwater management program. And built in, you can have credits for homeowners that are that haven't implemented and are maintaining BMPs. And so by assigning credits based on having these BMPs, you have a mechanism to collect that data. And then if there's a credit renewal process, so the credits aren't forever, you have a specific time frame in which these property owners have to renew their credit. You can use the O&M as a way to renew the credit, and therefore, again, have a mechanism to get that information from the property owners. And you have an incentive built in by giving credits on their stormwater fee for the utility. All right, so we know what the data is. We have talked through different ways to get the data. The next piece is kind of just logistical of like, how do you physically receive the data? Again, I'm going to break it into two components, the design information and the O&M, because not only are there different kinds of data, you have the more quantitative versus the qualitative stuff, but you're going to be getting it on a different kind of return frequency. The O&M stuff you're going to be getting more frequently versus when you design a BMP, you only really get that information once. So there are kind of different considerations for each. For the design information, I really just have a lot of questions on this slide, but they're all things to think about in terms of how you'd want to collect the data. So what departments getting the information, what departments plural are working together when there is development on a property, and how does that communication happen? What format are you getting the data in? Are you asking for completed design calculations and phosphorus credits, or are you asking for the basin, like the building blocks of those calculations, the land use types, the soil groups, the areas, or both, because you probably need that backup information anyway. But depending on what you're asking for and who you're asking it of, you might have different ways of receiving that data. And the other piece is just how are you calculating these and how are those calculations stored? One comment on the difference between planned BMPs and existing already installed BMPs. When you're thinking through things like the regulations, the incentives, the site plan approval process, these are all things that are much more geared towards BMPs that haven't been implemented yet. And when redevelopment is coming up, and how do you track BMPs coming through the system live? There's a whole other side of it, of course, that's anything that's already in the ground and is functioning and still being maintained. So that's a whole other lift in and of itself, whether you're having people go through as-builts and extract and digitizing data. The stormwater utility I talked about could be, again, a good mechanism to get that information, because if someone wants to get a credit and they have a BMP, there's a mechanism right there to go through and apply for that credit potentially for an already existing BMP. So plan reviews and stormwater utilities are kind of two of the main mechanisms that are probably the easiest for going through and finding existing ones. And like Matt said before, it's all a question of like the effort to find and extract that data versus the dollars associated with that effort compared to the dollars associated with implementing a new BMP. And then the other half of this data is, and how you get it, is the maintenance information. I'm just throwing up on this slide the kind of the certification in the permit that you have to essentially check and say that you've done in order to continue to claim credits. So the BMPs have to be inspected, maintained, and repaired in accordance with manufacturer or design specifications, and they have to be performing as originally designed. The twist in this piece is that there is no single time frequency to do this. There's no, in the permit, like every year you have to maintain your BMPs. It's all BMP specific. So it's based on the manufacturer design specification, and every BMP type has a different recommended frequency, which is a whole other kind of nebulous piece of this puzzle. Is how do you design a program to collect all this maintenance information if it's on different time scales? If you have like infiltration trenches that are largely below ground and may not have as much maintenance required as something with like vegetation and landscaping that requires much more frequent management and maintenance. One way to do it is the EPA has the self-certification program that they put out in partnership with the Mystic Stormwater Collaborative. And so this is an annual program, annual certification that basically the private property owner can do by themselves. And they have a certification forms based on the BMP type to go out and do an inspection. As part of it, because it's a self-certification program, there's an audit program that they develop to basically have municipal employees go out for a certain number based on how many they have to confirm that these self-certifications are reliable. So that's one way to do it. There are probably some other ways to either have your certifications and your maintenance schedules align with the BMP type to kind of try and speak to that whole question of how frequently, because not everything may not need to be maintained on an annual basis. So thinking about how to manage those differences. Okay, and the last piece, which I feel like has been kind of subtext through all of this is how do you manage the data? Clearly there is a ton of data, and unfortunately the quick answer is that there probably is no single way to do it. There's a lot of different tools out there, different file management systems, GIS, asset management software, of course, EPA's BAT tool. And I think a lot of it depends on what you have currently, what your workflow is for your site plan approval process, where you have that data stored, how you plan on claiming your credits. Are you going to be, do you need spreadsheets to go through the BAT tool? Or are you going to have a separate calculator? So again, these are kind of just a lot of questions. And I think the goal of the panel is to talk through some of this and like what's starting to work, what's maybe not working super well, that kind of stuff. So I think with that, I will stop talking and see if we want to go through any questions before we pivot to the panel. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Stephanie. That was great. Yes, there were some questions in the chat. I believe mostly from Matt's presentation, actually. So first question, when should communities use the 2016 versus the 2005 land use data for the credit calcs?
So that's a good question. I've been thinking about that. And I think it's kind of related to Sean's question also. And I'll just read that question out. Does the land use you select have to be consistent with the baseline land use that you used? I don't know that I know the exact answer to these, but I just want to throw out a few thoughts. And one of the things that I kind of keep coming back to a little bit is, how do you want to take your loads from the baseline loads were calculated in 2005? One of the things that you're going to have to do is update those loads to current conditions, to 2022. And there are a couple of ways to do that. One way is that you can just recalculate the loads using the way the EPA did for the baseline loads. You just use updated GIS data. So instead of using the 2005 impervious area and the 2005 land use, you use updated impervious area and land use. If you do that, then you can kind of come up to speed to current conditions. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is that I think you're going to want to be consistent with the way that you bring yourself up to current conditions and the way that you do the credit calculation. So if you bring yourself up to current conditions using the 2016 land use data, which would make sense because that's newer land use data, then you would probably want to do your credit calcs using that 2016 land use data. But I think there's going to be an issue that comes up, and this might be a good question for EPA and their Q&A session, which is that land use data from 2016 is a lot different from 2005. It's fundamentally different. And when you do your calcs using that data versus the 2005 data, I think the differences are going to be pretty significant. And so it'll be interesting to see how EPA wants to handle that, because EPA has said that, hey, a good way for you to bring yourself up to current conditions is just to redo the phosphorus load, area-wide phosphorus load calculations, the way we talked about in workshop 1. But if you do that with the 2016 land use data, differences are going to be pretty significant, and it'd be interesting to hear their thoughts on how to reconcile that. So that's probably kind of not a very clear answer, but I would say to think a little bit as you think about which land use data you want to use. I think a little bit about how you want to bring yourself up to current conditions. Now, the other way you can bring yourself up to current conditions is you can take the 2005 load that EPA gave you, and then you can go project by project, every development project that's happened within your community since then, and use the methodology in Appendix F, Attachment 1 of the permit, and calculate project by project how loads have increased. And if you do that, then you could use any land use data you want to do the land use credit, the calcs for the street cleaning. I suspect another thought that I want to throw out is if you're a lakes and pond community, you may want to use the 2016 land use data because the loading rate, the phosphorus loading export rate for the roads was developed for the Charles River communities. That loading rate is going to be higher than it would be in your community likely, because my guess is you may not be quite as urbanized as the Charles River communities. I could be wrong, but that's just an assumption. But if you are less developed, you would be using a phosphorus loading export rate that's higher than you may actually have for your streets. And if you use a loading rate that's higher, that means your credit's going to be higher. So just a few things to think about. Now, to Sean's question about does the land use have to be consistent with your baseline? I think this kind of gets back to the question that I was asking a little bit earlier. Like, if you use the 2016, how's EPA going to deal with that? So I don't quite know that you need to be consistent with the baseline, but we'd have to hear from EPA on that question. I do think that you want to be consistent when you do your street credit calc. Whatever land use you use for that, I think you want it to be consistent with the land use layer that you use to bring yourself up to current conditions. If you calculate your current conditions using sort of the area-wide calculation approach that we talked about in workshop 1. So I'm happy to talk individually about this. I'm sorry to give such a complicated answer. I don't know that this hasn't been really. I'm trying to guess like how EPA would approach this and what their what they would think about it. And I think that we could probably ask these questions of them in that last session.
Yeah, definitely seems like this topic should be on the list for sure, since this kind of questions in this vein came up at our last workshop as well. So I think that's a good suggestion. And then just a clarifying question here, can you claim the advanced organic cleanup credit and the street sweeping credit if you start sweeping in April and end in December? I think I was a little bit confused about that one too myself, Matt. Is that, I think basically people are, can you get that credit just if you're sweet sweeping, or do you also have to have, a leaf litter, like an actual collection program of your, yard waste pickup or whatever it is?
Yeah, it's a good question. Okay, so the answer to this one's a little bit more straightforward. And I asked Mark Voorhees the same question at EPA, because I was kind of confused about this too. You can get both. And it's basically, I was confused by this credit because it sounds like it's a leaf litter collection, but it's really a street sweeping type credit. So, so this is really oriented towards street sweeping in that sort of fall time when there's a lot of leaf litter down, and doing it proactively so that you're removing it frequently. So yes, you can claim both. You can double count them. For your street sweeping program, if it's active from April to December, that's 9 months out of the year. So there's that area reduction factor. You're going to use an area reduction factor of 0.75 because you're sweeping 9 months out of the 12 months. And for your advanced organic cleanup, you'll be able to claim that credit because you're sweeping from, I think you have to sweep from September through December on that. And you would be doing that. So yes, you could claim both for that.
Great, thank you. Okay, do we have more questions before we transition to our panel? Maria.
Luchika had a question in the chat about land use data, but it's not a very easy one to answer. When should communities use 2016 versus the 2005 land use data?
That's what Matt was just attempting to,
Oh, sorry.
Doing a wonderful job, I should say. Doing a wonderful job addressing to the best of his knowledge.
Attempting is a good way to put it.
Sorry, thank you. I was busy. Sorry, I didn't realize he answered it. Sorry.
No problem. Okay, all right. Well, I think we will keep right on time here. So I'm going to introduce our panel. And then, as I said, we're really hoping this will foster discussion. All right, so we have 5 awesome panelists with us today, joining from 4 different communities. So let's see, panelists, I'll, basically what we asked the panelists to do was have them go through one at a time, speak briefly, address some of the questions, which I'll introduce you folks to the prompt questions that we put to our panelists, and you guys can also start thinking about maybe what your answers would be to these. And so after each of our panelists has shared briefly, we'll actually just open it up to an open discussion, comment. If you've thought of more questions by then, you can also chime in with questions. So our panelists are Maria Rose from the city of Newton, Matt Schumann from the town of Watertown, Stephanie Carlisle and Bridget Graziano from the town of Medway, and Kim Donovan from the town of Needham. Panelists, I will also ask maybe when you speak, if you can just let everybody know your kind of relationship or what your, are you the main point person for the MS4 permit in your community? Are you on a large team of people that works on the MS4 permit? I'm guessing nobody is that, but if you can just let us all know kind of what your role in MS4 compliance is in your community, I think that'd be helpful. And then these are the prompt questions that we put to our panelists. And, you know, again, panelists, you can cover whichever one of these you feel like, and if you don't have much to say on some of these, you're welcome to skip them. But what role do you see private BMPs playing in meeting phosphorus load reduction requirements? What is your process for reviewing projects? How do you ensure projects meet your community standards? How do you extract the data to calculate credits? And how do you certify that O&M is being completed? At what scale or for what properties are you tracking and enforcing O&M of private BMPs? And again, some of these we anticipate are just in the planning phase. So how are you guys, maybe if you're not doing these already, how are you thinking about them? For what you have done, what's working? What interdepartmental collaboration is needed to make this process successful? What are some of your current concerns, challenges, and uncertainties related to credits from private BMPs? I know folks have some thoughts to share on that one. And what is your vision for the future in terms of credits for private BMPs? What role do you see these playing in your community? All right, so with that, I will turn it over to our first panelist, Maria Rose.
Thank you, Julie. Let's see. So they don't have the questions in front of them, so I'll just sort of repeat. The first question was, what role do you see private BMPs playing in meeting phosphorus load reduction? So we see private landowners playing a critical role in helping us to achieve our phosphorus load reduction targets. The city of Newton does not have enough land to build the thousands of new stormwater BMPs needed to reach our phosphorus load reduction requirement of a whopping 5,203 pounds or 2,365 kilograms. Roughly 20% of this, I'm hoping, is going to come from the removal of the illicit sewer connections through our IDD program. But let's face it, that's still an enormous amount of phosphorus to remove from existing land uses. So the next question was, what is our process for reviewing projects? So currently all development and redevelopment projects that trigger a 1 or 2 sentence item in our zoning ordinance, which basically says that if you propose to create 400 square feet or more of new impervious surface area, it triggers engineering review and a policy. That policy is now getting developed into a standalone ordinance that will not be in the zoning section. It will be a general bylaw. But anyway, that process includes that when you're triggered for an engineering review for stormwater, that means that you need to submit site civil plans, a drainage design and calculations need to be provided to show that you mitigate the additional stormwater runoff from the proposed development. For special permits and other large projects, stormwater management systems need to be designed to handle the total impervious surface area as if it was a virgin site, not just the net increase. And the new stormwater permit has some different layers for that, or the new stormwater ordinance, which creates three permit categories, but that is in the process of being adopted right now. So the next question is, how do you ensure projects meet your community standards, and how do you extract that data? So as I mentioned, we're in the process of vetting and adopting through our city council approval process a new stormwater ordinance that is a little over 2 years in the making, and I can't wait until the thing is adopted. And it has supporting rules and regulations that incorporate the requirements of the MS4 permit. And so that's how, and so the rules and regulations are extremely detailed. And so that's how we'll meet our standards. Like, they're very specific of what we're looking for and what reductions for TSS and for phosphorus and what every nitty gritty detail that should be on the plans. And then how do we certify if O&M is being completed? We're not really quite there just yet. So we're looking at that and how we might handle that. Right now, we have a little bit of a start on that because we do have a stormwater enterprise fund. Any project that is not residential, we track, to make sure that they're doing O&M to get a stormwater credit. But to be honest, there's very few commercial and nonprofit properties, maybe 10% of all the ones that have applied for a stormwater credit. We're requiring to submit O&M plans. We just don't currently require them at the small parcel level, your single family, two family, small residential units. In the future, once our stormwater ordinance is adopted, it will go to a very small parcel level, potentially down to the single family house. We'll have to have O&M plans. So to be continued on how we track and certify that operations and maintenance are being completed. I guess in the ordinance, in the rules and regulations, it does say that you have to have annual submittal of proof of that. And then I already mentioned that we track projects down to the level of 400 square feet of new construction. And what's been working about this process, we have a new online permitting system called NewGov, and that's pretty nifty. Everything is electronic, so hopefully tracking things and getting everything into our internal network files, as we have approved plan folders, and then we have as-built folders for every project that is reviewed by our engineering division. And so having everything online and required to have PDFs will make it more streamlined for tracking for the MS4 permit. And then so far, the collaboration that we've needed is our inspectional services department is critical. They're basically the first stop. That's where your building permits are pulled. So having them on board and having the collaboration with them is key. We also collaborate with our planning department for larger projects and just in general, just overarching big picture planning. And then lately, I've been looking at opportunities with our Parks, Rec, and Culture department because there's definitely projects that they're working on that could very easily incorporate stormwater management with just a little extra effort, and sometimes maybe not too much extra effort. And then what are some of our current concerns and challenges and uncertainties regarding the credits from private BMPs? So I would say our single biggest concern is probably everyone's biggest concern, and that is the tremendous cost associated with this program and the cost to our taxpayers, and how to cost effectively use those funds that are allocated to this effort. And then the last question about vision for this program. I know some people are probably going to say about proprietary BMP, so I'm not going to touch that one. I'd love to see a better credit for leaf litter collection and organics. I'd also love to see like a few years into this phosphorus control program, some sort of metrics, some calibration or recalibration that's done. Like, this is a lot of money to spend on this program, millions of dollars. And there's not a way right now to know if it's successful. And I'm asked by our constituents, how are we measuring success? So I know it's a lot of work went in to get to this point, but I kind of liken it to, you know, weight loss program. You got so many pounds that you got to lose off of your belly or whatever. And you don't do that without like checking your cholesterol and your blood pressure and your weight and monitoring things over time to see if you're, you know, not just, well, my clothes fit looser. I mean, if it's a small program, you might just say, oh, my clothes fit looser and I'm good. And there's some ways that are similar to this, analogous to this. It's like, okay, we don't have any algal blooms anymore, so the program's working. But I think it would be really nice if EPA or DEP or somebody to check, like with actual analytical tests that show how's this progressing. Are we meeting what we're intending to do? Is it working? Is it not working? Do we need to shift and recalibrate and go into a different direction? So that is my vision or hope. Another big thing is that we have a lot of college campuses and a lot of very big property owners in Newton. And it's hard enough to talk with when you're in a big city with your own departments internally, and then to reach out to like large Boston College, LaSalle, and Mount Ida, and all these campuses, and it's very overwhelming. So I would really like to see EPA propose. It doesn't necessarily have to be through the RDA process or whatnot, but maybe through land use categories that really make a lot of sense, that they have their own NPDES permit, like the ones I just mentioned, or maybe industrial property users that are already familiar with it. Maybe you tack on phosphorus to their industrial NPDES permit already. So those are some of my vision ideas and hopes for the future with credits to help us in the long run. And then, of course, you know, I've already mentioned the single biggest concern I would say is cost for the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. And can you just quickly also mention, are you kind of like the main MS4 point person in Newton, or what's your relationship with?
Sadly, what is my relation? Sorry, I forgot to answer. Sadly, yes. the buck begins and ends with me. But there are many people that are involved, thankfully. So we have, like, on our NPDES, what is it called? My brain's not working. What do we call that thing that we all had to do the first year?
Kind of like the team.
SWIP, the Stormwater Management Plan. Yeah. So in that SWIP, that nobody probably reads but me, there are people that are targeted with certain, you know, roles and responsibilities, from our highway superintendent for streets to our solid waste coordinator. So there's many different people that have a role to play. So it's a very large program, but I am on that stormwater management plan document, the program manager for the MS4 permit.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Sorry. And next we'll go to Matt.
Thanks, Julie. I think Matt did a nice job in his presentation of touching a lot of the things that I would probably touch on, and Maria was also really thorough with comments and made some comments I hadn't even thought about. And I liked the analogy about the diet and how you track your metrics. I'm the city engineer in Watertown, and I do basically manage the MS4 program. I work within DPW on sort of the other issues we have with the MS4 program, and then also interact in plan review, reviewing BMPs and tracking our spreadsheet for phosphorus removal. If you're not familiar with Watertown, we're a very dense community. We're basically fully built out. We have large commercial and industrial parcels, but we also have probably about half the town is small lot, 2-family, single-family houses. One of the advantages we have is we are undergoing a lot of redevelopment right now. So a lot of these commercial and industrial parcels are undergoing land use change, and it's providing us an opportunity to get in some BMPs and improve our phosphorus reductions. So I definitely see private property playing a large role in helping us meet our TMDL requirements. And our requirement is a little bit lower than Newton's. It's only 1,550 pounds per year of phosphorus. But I do see that the redevelopment and development will be helping us meet those goals. So we have a stormwater ordinance like everyone hopefully does. Ours kicks in at an increase of 500 square feet in impervious area or a disturbance of 5,000 square feet. So our thresholds are a lot lower than the 1 acre threshold in the MS4 permit, which I think also helps us in meeting those goals, because I think although we have a lot of 1 acre parcels, it's really not enough. We recently updated our ordinances and our rules and regulations, and we adopted the 60% removal of proposed phosphorus that was in the MS4 permit. So I think there were 2 options that you could consider, and I don't remember off the top of my head what the other one was, but we chose to just go with the 60% removal. Our process for reviewing projects is basically, someone applies for a permit and we review it. We require the phosphorus removal calculations. We recommend the BAT tool be used, but we find a lot of folks maybe are just using the tables. But in any case, if we don't have things in the BAT tool, we'll sometimes go in and use that tool just to kind of independently verify the calculations that we're getting. O&M is definitely a challenge, like everyone else is saying. Our regulations require operations and maintenance, but basically states that the city reserves the right to inspect or to request records. So it's probably not as strong as it could be, or as maybe some other communities are doing. So we're really struggling with how we keep on top of developments and making sure that they do their operation and maintenance. Just in terms of like the scale of the properties we're looking at, although we don't necessarily ask for the phosphorus removal calculations for really small projects like single family houses or 500 square foot increases. Although they are required to get a permit. Pretty much any large project that by large is basically a commercial or industrial project that requires a permit. We'll be submitting calculations to us, and we intend to track those. So I would say, if you're thinking about pounds per year, a small project might be like 1/10 of a pound per year credit. A large project could be a couple of pounds per year, depending upon what the actual scope is. I think though, in terms of what's working with the process, it's chugging along. It's not very efficient. There is definitely some challenges that other people have mentioned already, but it is sort of working. We are struggling with how we organize and order the data and how we kind of keep on top of it, because it is right now for us a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of individual files or documents that are just filed away. So we do need to collate them at some point. DPW is basically like the go-to department for the MS4 permit and for these issues. So, you know, there's not, we are involved with all the other departmental reviews. So we're not necessarily working with other departments on the review, the technical review, but we work with them through all types of planning board submissions, conservation commission submissions. We're also pushing with our parks programs to try and get BMPs in our parks. So again, a lot of these things have been brought up before, but the uncertainties in terms of the 1,550 pounds per year, and with some of those credits potentially changing when the next permit comes out, that's a big challenge for us because, you know, the number is sort of a moving target. And it's 1,550 pounds is daunting to us. So even these credits, like I said, you know, redevelopment doing a couple pounds per year sounds like a lot, but it's a drop in the bucket for 1,550 pounds per year. We're also struggling with the non-structural BMPs because we're finding that they really, my sense is they're not cost effective in terms of just the ongoing either capital costs to buy equipment or staffing costs or maintenance costs. And, you know, the frequencies go up quite substantially from twice per year to weekly. We have 72 miles of road here. It's really not feasible for us to do some of the frequencies that they're looking at. And, you know, the RDA is also something that's out there that it would certainly help us in meeting our, you know, our requirements, because although we have a lot of redevelopment, we have a lot of parcels that aren't redeveloping and maybe won't be redeveloping, and that would help us kind of lasso some properties, additional properties in. And then just in general, some concerns. And again, I think Maria hit a lot of them, but you know, the proprietary systems, I did go to a webinar 2 weeks ago. Rhode Island gives credit for some proprietary phosphorus removal systems. And it's a challenge on some of our sites to, you know, particularly if they have high groundwater, poor soils, or previous industrial uses that preclude infiltration. And even, you know, size-wise, getting to a filtration type system can be difficult. You know, and to that extent, a lack of familiarity with some of the other BMPs that are out there. So, you know, I think our department is really good at looking at infiltration systems, and we've gotten a lot better at looking at, you know, bioretention and sort of other filtration techniques. But, you know, I just got a project for a huge sand filter, and to me, that's more of a water or wastewater treatment device that I'm not really familiar with anymore. So it's hard for us to review those things. And then finally, we found some of the engineers submitting plans to us really just aren't up to speed. So I guess an idea for CRWA or, you know, some of the other organizations out there is maybe to reach out to some of the consultants and try and train them, particularly some of the smaller ones. Sometimes it gets easier for us to do the calculations for them than to ask them to give them to us. So yeah, I would say that those are most of our challenges and concerns. I think like we're definitely making a lot of progress like everyone else is. And I appreciate like bringing all of us together to have this conversation, because we're all in the same boat. And I think we're all coming to a lot of different conclusions. Thanks.
Thank you. Actually, that was going to be my follow-up question as far as what were you seeing when you're getting calculations submitted to you, because I've definitely seen some, you know, again, I mean, just design firm or whomever not fully, and it's complicated, as we've covered in two-hour workshops. And so some of the submissions I've seen, at least for like how, you know, how these folks in the private sector have done the calculations, it's, you know, not, you know, close, but, you know, maybe close or maybe way off base. It kind of varies. It sounds like that's your experience too. Yeah. Yeah. Well, hopefully someone has already submitted a question about RDA for our Ask the Regulator session, so we can all get an update on that. If not, I'll clue them in that that's going to come up. All right. And next I will turn it over to Stephanie and Bridget from Medway.
Hey, so I'm Stephanie Carlisle. I'm the compliance coordinator. So I kind of manage the MS4 requirements, but I work with Bridget constantly on all of this stuff. She's our conservation agent. And it's really a partnership between, you know, myself and the DPW, Bridget and conservation, and then our planning department. So the three of us, we really are trying to build this interdepartmental kind of relationship where, you know, Bridget and Susie, our planning director, she, you know, they kind of take care of it in the beginning part, like the planning pieces and, you know, anything redevelopment, we try to get all of those new pieces. And then I'm in the DPW, so I'm trying to, you know, help follow up with O&M for private. We're starting to do that a little bit, but we're just trying to get a hold of what's out there currently and on like town managed properties. So we kind of, you know, anything that's private, you know, we're counting that as like our private roads, our permanently private roads. And then the, you know, we have our town category. So anything that's on a town property. And then anything in a subdivision with a drainage easement, that's kind of, we call that our town managed pieces. And so we're trying to go through plans one by one, get data. You know, Medway is like a bedroom community, a big boom in the 90s and 2000s. And, you know, but a lot of it was in the 80s as well. And so you don't have the data that you need to kind of put into a back tool. But we're working on it. But, you know, Bridget's been doing really great with her order of conditions through conservation. And I don't know if she wants to talk a little bit about that, what we've been doing lately.
Okay. Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, so essentially, the town of Medway, we are a smaller town, a little over 14,000 people. And we did approve at our town meeting in 2018, our stormwater bylaw, which has two components. Those two components are run by the three departments that Stephanie was talking about. So there's one component which deals with the MS4, which is run by DPW. And then the second component is your land disturbance, which Matt and Maria both touched on, which is this idea of how much impervious surface or land disturbance is happening on a lot or multiple lots under the same ownership. So conservation and planning both handle those larger land disturbance permits. We're a little bit bigger in our breakdown under the 1 acre. So we do 20,000 square feet of land disturbance and 10,000 square feet of impervious will trigger what's called a land disturbance permit. And that generally is in some collaboration with an additional permit, whether it be a subdivision permit or a special permit with planning board or an order conditions for the Conservation Commission. So depending on what prevails under that particular bylaw, that regulatory authority will go ahead and handle that land disturbance permit. I'll just stay with my particular permit. So most of the time and most of the developments that we get do have orders of conditions, so they will stay with the Conservation Commission. We do have our land disturbance permit broken down into new development versus redevelopment. And then our standards for TSS removal and phosphorus are the same for redevelopment, 80% and 50%, like the Stormwater Management Handbook. And then for new development, we have an increased requirement for 90% TSS removal and 60% phosphorus removal. All of those are reviewed during our hearing process and are reviewed by our town consulting engineer, which we have Tetra Tech. And then once a project's approved, essentially we require in the order of conditions in the land disturbance permit reporting annually. So this is sort of where we start to play into Stephanie's realm. So obviously during construction, we have reporting based on what BMPs you have, whether it's just for phosphorus and the, your infiltration or total suspended solids. So we do monitoring throughout, reporting throughout based on the order conditions, but the conditions in perpetuity that stay are your land, are your land disturbance, and under your order conditions are your annual reporting. And that's sort of where these reports will go over to planning board, conservation, and Stephanie at DPW. And that is where I'm hoping that she can pick up and review the credits, and we can start taking into account some credits for that phosphorus removal there when we get the annual reports. So, we have been recently a little bit ahead of the game in the sense of we have been sending out letters to newer developments. Stephanie sort of mentioned how we break it down into different components, town-owned, town managed and privately managed, whether it's a private road subdivision, industrial, commercial, whatever it may be. We essentially review that during the annual report, and we have, we're sending out letters reminding the newer ones to say, hey, come on in and talk to us. Here's your O&M that you agreed upon post-construction, which is why we gave you a certificate of compliance, whether it be for your land disturbance permit or for your order of conditions or for your closeout with planning. And here, I actually have them sign a document at closing that they're aware of the O&M and that they have to manage it. I resend them that document saying, remember the time that you signed this document and said you would manage your O&M. And the idea is that, like, if you're managing your system, we can account for the credits. And so that's how we're sort of calculating the certification part. So if we can prove that they're doing the inspections, cleaning when necessary, according to the BMPs that they designed for the subdivision or industrial commercial, then that's my idea, that we'd be then taking credits for it, and Stephanie would account for those credits. We have met with 2 new subdivisions, privately owned, and gave them all the materials and documentation. And then we're meeting with another commercial development. These are all very new in the past, like 3 years. So we're going back and making sure. I mean, obviously, if we get into like, what are your concerns or challenges? It's how do we have the time to do any of this? None of us have the time to go back and be managing through this. I happen to have an intern that I got to send out all the documentation, and I had it easily available. But, this is the idea that we would be getting back to these newer developments. So when Stephanie said, going back, I mean, I think that's our biggest challenge, is going back into the older subdivisions and how do we grab them and get them to start doing something that they may not even have known about 20, 30 years ago. I mean, we have subdivisions that are just going through street acceptance that are 30 years old. And so I'm having them, that's a good catcher. When they go for street acceptance, you can have them redo their O&M plan, start from scratch, clean all their BMPs and start over. Stephanie briefly touched on the departments that work together. So planning, conservation, building, DPW. Some of the other components we use that are really great is, bonds, working with planning board, and then their COs on buildings, like building department will work with us to make sure it's held until we get what we need at the end of a project. Stephanie, I know you want to say something.
Well, I wanted to just say, one of the challenges is building this this mechanism. That's been the real challenge. It's like a muscle memory of, this goes to this and that triggers, and building the whole process. And, just right now, so for example, the street acceptance, the one I'm working on right now, they're out there grading an old BMP that was an accepted street, but they didn't fix the detention basin to how it was supposed to be. So now the town's picking up the tab. We're doing it low budget as we possibly can, but it'll be working. So then when we just had a new street go, ask for acceptance by the town, we said, no, you have to fix all of this. And we're not going to just let it go anymore. So that was a big shock to everybody. And it's expensive. And, there was probably 10 people out at site, from different departments, and the tree company and the excavating company, everybody, to see what do we need? What do we want? And actually making it happen on the ground. So, I mean, those are two that are just happening right now. And it's going to be, the one that we're working on, the town-owned one, it's going to at least be a $50,000 job at the end, at least. And we have 97 of these, at least, that we know of. And the list keeps growing every time we get out there into the field and we're doing our BMP inspections. We're like, that looks like a BMP. So, and the privately owned ones are about half of the total. So getting those people to realize that they have something there, and actually having them take care of it, and it's a cost. We have a commercial development in town that has a really difficult time with street sweeping their parking lots. And so we're just after them for it, and it's a struggle. And that with the RDA, it'll be very helpful for the town. And I just hope that if some iteration of that comes out, there'll be a lot of extra support for communities to help educate the property owners in their town of what's going to be required for them. That's a big one. And I hope our catch basin cleaning program can get us some more credits in the future, because it should be a frequency thing, because I think it's an important part of capturing any leaf litter, and it should be incentivized and given credit for in the future. So that's what I don't know. I don't have anything else really to say.
Great. Yeah, so I guess you guys talked more than our previous panelists about capturing credits from things that are already in the ground. So it sounds like that's a big, well, I don't know about big, I guess, but that's definitely a piece of the puzzle for you guys. Do you have a sense of how much compliance you might be able to get from that that effort, or is it still kind of too early to tell because there's all the other pieces with finding them and documenting the O&M and
so I've done
the calcs?
I've done some I've built in a lot of assumptions into the back tool when I enter them in, because I don't have all the impervious and the actual drainage area and all the pieces that you put in there. So I did a best guess, but what we currently have in the ground, private and public, private in town, whatever, is maybe 155 pounds. Mm-hmm. We have to remove 882 pounds. So okay. It's a pretty, but
it's a good piece.
Yeah.
Great. Excellent. All right. And last but absolutely not least, Kimberly Donovan from Needham.
Definitely the least out of all of these people. They are all way more prepared than I am. That is for definite sure. I can tell you that. I'm actually going to share my screen because I need prompts. Can somebody allow me access to share?
Yes. Yeah, I think we can make you. No problem. I think we can make you a co-host. Julia, are you able to do that?
Yes, I am. I'll do that right away.
Awesome. Thank you.
After listening to all the other panelists, I'm feeling woefully uneducated about stuff. Okay.
Learning process for everybody, I think. So.
Oh,
good to.
Is an understatement.
While you're waiting for that, I'll just say there's one thing I forgot to say, and that is on the O&M level, I feel like a lot of our consultants have said that for homeowners, they build them or design them to be maintenance free. So I'm feeling a very heavy hurdle, a big hurdle to overcome for maintenance at like the homeowner level, just to point it out there.
Well, and I also, I mean, I'll get to that at the end when we get to the question, but one of my concerns, what happens if you have a homeowner who you start sending out letters, hey, you have a BMP on site, and they're like, what do you mean I have a BMP? They didn't even know it. Like they could have sold the property and nobody even told them anything was there. Now they have no idea what to do or how to do anything about it. And how do you get the information to them as to what they should be doing and what's appropriate and things like that. But that's, yeah, part of it. Can everybody see my screen?
We can see your screen, but people are having trouble hearing you. If you're,
move my microphone a little, is that better?
Oh, that's a lot better, I think. Yeah, okay. Hopefully that.
Sorry, I moved my wireless microphone thing so because it was making noise.
Yeah, it's a delicate process with those earbuds. I hear you.
Okay. So the first one is, what role do you see private BMPs? So at the moment, we use Beta as our engineer to help us with MS4, a lot of MS4 projects and coordination and documentation and things like that, as well as internal resources. So they kind of supplement what we already do. But at the moment, we do an assumptive approach to calculating phosphorus reduction on the private BMPs. So we assume because it's at specific amount, a certain amount of properties or whatever, it's removing this much based on 1 inch of ground. It's not exact. It's nowhere near probably what it actually is, but it's the best guess estimate at the moment. And it's probably it's pretty conservative what we guess at, because we don't want to overstate something and then underdeliver. So it does have the potential to account for a significant portion of our overall, but we're not really sure how to record the O&M, because again, like everybody else, we have the challenge of resources. And if people are giving us maintenance records, are they flowing in all year long? Is it only a specific time of year? Who would get that? Who would input it? I'm thinking of the data entry it would require for the thousands of properties, and kind of getting vibes just thinking about it, because it's just me that does it and I don't have anybody else. If I had one of those lovely little interns, that would be great, but we don't have those all the time, so I can't depend on that. So we are looking into doing a stormwater utility in Needham, but the utility would cover the costs of replacing BMPs and things like that right now, not necessarily, and it's just a flat utility. It's not, we don't have anything in there for like credits and things like they were charging before, although it's an interesting idea and I will bring that up again, or bring that up to whoever is, to our DPW director who's working with the town to implement that. But maybe those can be some of the ways we get that information. I'm just really not sure how we manage that information. So process for reviewing projects and making sure they're meeting standards and stuff. So we have a stormwater bylaw, which indicates what they have to do, what's required by everybody who either has a new property or does additions and or large community developments or anything of that nature. So the bylaw applies to every property. We planning and zoning, like in Medway, and conservation add to their orders of conditions for developments or things that they're reviewing. They add the requirements in there that they have to be reporting on those things. Our challenge is once they've handed it all off from there, is following up with those annual maintenances. Again, that's my biggest struggle, is figuring out how to do that. We do have online permitting, which does have the electronic file submission, which is hugely helpful. That actually came into effect, ironically, 2020. We launched it March 18th. We all got sent home for the pandemic on March 13th, or something of that nature. It was not intended that way, but it turned out that way, and it was really great to be able to do it. But the side benefit to it is that everything's already in electronic format, because I'm sure Needham is not the only town, but paper was their best friend, and the amount of paper storage we have of files and things and stuff to go through is, I can't even quantify it. We probably go to the moon and back with the amount of paper that we store and storage units that we have stuff in. So to get through all those and get it electronically categorized, cataloged, filed, and sorted into some sort of data management, again, overwhelmingly, it kind of starts making my heart palpitate a little bit. So certification of the ongoing O&M is our challenge to track and to certify those things. Scale of property. So as of 2018, when our bylaws went into effect, all new houses, doesn't matter what size, all new houses require infiltration to be submitted as part of their permit application to the building department, as well as any additions that are greater than 25% of the dwelling's current footprint. So on our permit, we do our permitting through VPC, through Viewpoint Cloud, and we have a calculation in there that you put in your square footage of your property. You put in the square footage of what it exists now, what you're adding on the square footage, and it calculates it for you. And if it is over 25%, it will trigger another set of questions and plan requirements, so that the documents they have to upload include stormwater infiltration. So that has been an extremely big help, because sometimes those calculations of how much square footage you're actually adding can be, it's kept it from being a little bit less, oh, well, they're close enough and they don't have to, it doesn't have to fit. It's been more accurate and easier to track that way.
What did you say, Kimberly, what did you say that program that you use for that is called?
That's the building permit. So the residential or commercial building permits.
And that's just through your online system that they're filling
the
that
online
out?
building permit. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
great.
So when they fill out the permit, they have to fill out all those square footage information, and it will automatically calculate it for them. They don't have to actually do anything or put anything in it, but it will automatically calculate it, and it will trigger the next set of questions and also trigger a required upload of stormwater stuff. Yes.
Sounds like Maria has a question about that too.
Yes.
Kimberly, what do you do for commercial though? What's the trigger for anything other than residential?
Commercial, I think, is more of a manual process, to be honest with you. Residential is definitely that automatic one. Commercial, because we don't have a ton of commercial. I mean, they're more changing what's already existing. They're not really building a whole lot of new lots as much. I think the building inspectors really handle the commercials a little bit more, I'd say, hands-on, one-on-one. Because they're more in depth and more involved, and their plans, like we have the new hospital site going in, their plans are like 1,000 pages. So they really are more, they're less of the online permitting part than the residential. So it's probably 98% residential that are captured in that calculation. What's working about the process? Well, removal of phosphorus is good, regardless if it's on a small or large scale, because every little bit helps. You know, how do you eat an elephant? One piece at a time. However, we struggle how to track and report it, and we really don't know how to, besides the resources to do it, we don't know how to, what would be the quote unquote penalty if somebody doesn't comply? Like, what if somebody refused to give us maintenance efforts in there? Like, it's not, there's no backlash to them at the moment. Obviously, if we're looking into those utility costs and things like that, maybe there could be something they're not going to get the deduction or things like that. But at the moment, I don't really have any way to enforce, for lack of a better term, enforce complying with the operations and maintenance reporting. Like, I don't have a way to do that, and I don't have somebody available to go out and, you know, knock on my door and say, hi, I need this information and what can we do, or send repeated letters and things like that. So that's kind of our biggest, or one of our biggest hurdles. So interdepartmental collaboration, at the moment, I am the compliance coordinator in Needham, and was actually hired because of the MS4 permit. When I first started, the mandate was, I need you to just basically herd all the cats in town and get them to give you all the information you need to do to put the annual report together. And it has grown into this monstrosity of a coordination effort and instruction of how to do things, coming up with SOPs for every department as to what they're doing, how they do it, meeting with each individual department, telling them how they run their inspections on their BMPs to make sure they're capturing it. Once they've identified something that needs to happen on their BMP, who do they call? What happens? What do they do? Those kinds of things. So it's become a larger task than just you do this, you do this, you do this. It's kind of an all-encompassing thing. But so far, the major departments that we work with is building department, engineering, because they do the site plan reviews, planning and development, zoning, water, sewer, and drains, obviously. The select board, because they're the ones who have to pass any bylaws or changes to that. And then any others as we see fit. So we work with the health department because of the septic component. We work with Parks and Recreation because they do public outreach events with us sometimes. And so it really touches every part of the town and every department within the town, probably other than the taxes, until we put in the stormwater utility, and then they're back in the fold again. What are some of the current concerns, challenges, and uncertainties? All of it. Using the assumption that we do now, I don't know that we're taking as much credit as we could for phosphorus removal that we could, which is unfortunate. But we do have, we have infiltration requirements for buildings and additions. We do have a rain barrel program, but other than selling them a rain barrel, I don't know how we track is the resident using it. I don't have somebody available that could go out and say, oh, well, this address purchased a rain barrel. Are they actually using them? Do they have them out? Are they, I don't know why you'd buy them if you weren't going to use them. However, what if the previous owner had them and they didn't, the next one doesn't use them? How do we track that or do that? Leaf collection program. So the credits for the leaf sweeping. So we do street sweeping as well. We do twice fall and spring sweeping. We also may sweep weekly our downtown area. And we also sweep any additional areas that seem to have build up or other things in town aside from the downtown area when noticed by our water and sewer department. So I'm not really sure. I don't know that we count what we do for the leaf part of it, but we do have a program where we have leaf collection days where residents can bring in leaf collections and bring them to the RTS for, I think it's either 4 or 6. I think it's 4 to 6 weeks in the fall area. Every Saturday or Sunday is committed to that. Sam, did you have a question?
Hey there. This slide talking about concerns and challenges, it's more specific than what's on the slide, so I apologize if I'm derailing a little bit. But a current issue that we have that's not found in Brookline's rules and regulations is allowing overflows into our system and trying to coordinate with homeowners who might be located on ledge or soils that are not able to infiltrate well, or in a very wet part of town when we allow overflows to the system. And I just didn't know if anyone or you have any experience with this, or criteria that you guys, or language that you use to specify when to allow an overflow into the system. And, of course, not knowing whether or not your system has sufficient capacity is probably step one, but that's a big topic that we're trying to figure out how to address. And I just didn't know if you or anyone had any helpful feedback as part of the current challenges theme that you wouldn't mind sharing.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. So water overflows, like in terms of like a big storm?
Like stormwater overflow, right? So like if they have a BMP on site and they can only infiltrate a certain amount based off of soil types on their property, whether it's commercial or residential, and then they ask for an overflow. Like we have regs that require like a certain, like a pump that it goes into, or a dry well with a pump before it goes into our system, but just, when to allow overflows and who should get them, or like what are the conditions that allow people to say like, oh, we're so sorry, we can't meet your guidelines, but if you let us put some stormwater into your system, then we can. So I know this is kind of out there, but if anyone has thoughts, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, me personally, I would have to say it would have to be, unfortunately, like specific to the property itself, because your water and sewer or whomever would need to assess, first of all, if you even have the capacity for it, and then also determining what that capacity is for how long it could happen. So if we have like a 100-year storm and all of a sudden they have 25 inches of water, well, we're okay with you overflowing 4 inches, but I can't handle 20. But how do they stop it once they start it? It's not like they're gonna, unhook the hose or whatever it is.
This has been the debate of my existence since I've started here in town, because the way our bylaw is written is that you can't have a connection to our town's drainage system. Even if you had one previously, then you're considered, it's an illicit connection, and you're not complying with our bylaw. So we're finding a lot of people are connected through sump pumps or their roof runoff to our MS4, and they've been like that for years. And we're trying to figure out a way to encourage disconnection, so we can encourage infiltration on site, because I mean, Medway is nothing like Brookline. We have acre lots mostly, and there's room, but the groundwater is high. Medway is high groundwater, ledge, and clay. Like there's very little sandy soils, good for infiltration. So it has been such a challenge to come up with regs that discourage connection from the get-go through new development. And then when this comes up for redevelopment, and if say you can't do all your infiltration, you want to expand, but you won't be able to keep all your water on site, how's that? And then for the existing homeowner that's not even doing any construction, but we just find them through our IDDE plan, how do we get them to disconnect? It's been a struggle, and I can't seem to, but Bridget was big on this, because how do you manage what's in your system if you can't manage who's connected to it?
So Medway does have, an allowance to apply for what's called an MS4 permit in our stormwater bylaw. So you can go ahead and try to apply. And it says to be approved by Department of Public Works. And I think the issue that we struggle with is that we haven't actually set up a full criteria for it. And that's what Stephanie is getting at is, the first thing that we do is tell somebody it's an illicit discharge if it's found, and we ask them to disconnect, but they have to prove, so essentially to sort of answer the question, yes, it happens in town, and they have to prove to the town that they are not overwhelming or impacting our system. So they'd have to apply for like how much overflow would be entering into our system. They would have to show the stormwater calculations for that. And then DPW would have to review that and make a decision on it. One of the issues that I think we run into a lot is that we have found commercial entities that have connections and also have hits, because we do testing at our outfalls. So we get testing results, and sometimes we have unfavorable, we'll just say unfavorable conditions. So that is definitely one of the criteria. You cannot have anything going into our system that has any level of contamination. So we will require that testing before we approve any MS4 permit. I'll say that. So basically stormwater calcs, that showing that it's clean water, showing that the system can handle it. And that in itself discourages lots of people who can't afford to get all those materials together. However, we do, like I said, have some commercial entities that are looking to do that. And unfortunately, we have an old school one, which is Medway Block, which DEP allowed, somehow worked with the town years ago to allow the connection, and they have contamination on site with a sand filter. And I could go on and on. That broke, but I hate that connection and I want it disconnected, but somehow they proved to the state that they can't connect and they need to discharge because of the contamination. So I think that there's a criteria that we can get together and develop. I think we're not exactly there, but I think just those 3 standards in itself are burdensome to the average person, is calculating your outflow, provide testing that you're not impacting our system, and that testing has to be done annually, with DPW. So I think that burden itself has a number of people stray away from that. But again, don't forget, like Stephanie said, like we're a suburban community, and we have the ability to force people to go to other places to do it. So if we know ourselves, or our consulting engineer can say, no way, this is how they can do it, then they have to do it a different way.
Thank you.
The only
Thank you
thing
both
Needham really has,
in on that, Bridget.
The only thing Needham really has is a small drain connection request but water and sewer has to approve it. So I don't really know that there's a significant way to stop it other than that. That's what happened with a lot of our illicit connection when we did the IDDE plan originally, and we removed all of the illicit connections. That was what resulted from it.
Miranda, I don't remember exactly.
Thank you. Apologies for taking you off the rails there.
No, you're fine.
No, sounds like this is a hot topic. I just jumping in because of the time. We budgeted a full 2 hours for this one, half an hour longer first workshop, and we still came right up against the time. Kim, though, I don't want to cut you off. Did you have?
Oh no, I'm good. You're good. Okay. I've basically the same issues on here that everybody else had, so you are totally fine. How do I shut this down? Totally fine. Everybody else is way more clear than I am. You're good.
No, that was excellent. That was excellent. It was great to see a variety. Huge thank you to our panelists. I will throw up my applause emoji there. Thank you guys. It was really interesting to hear kind of the different approaches, where you are in your planning, where your focus is. And it's really also was interesting to hear, especially now that things are kind of rolling, and it is, I think we probably all on this call have experience putting processes into place. Easier said than done, takes a long time to do it. Don't get it right the first time, you gotta loop back. So thank you guys so much for sharing what's going on in your communities and participating in our workshop today. I think, Stephanie, I don't know if you want to put the slides up. We just had a closing slide, just reminding people of the dates of our last two workshop. I saw there was a question in the chat about the RDA. I am just gonna leave that to EPA when they come and talk to us, because any attempts I've had in the past to really understand what might happen and when, it just continues to be a mystery. So May 10th, May 24th, hopefully you have those on your calendars. And yeah, May 24th, we will get an RDA update. And the data request, final plug for the data request, if you can this week. I saw somebody else, Luchika, maybe in the chat, said you're going to have some maybe next week or coming soon. So I'm happy to have that too. And I think that is it for us. There's the QR code if you want to scan your screen, get right onto the website. It's also linked from our homepage. If you just go to crwa.org and then scroll down a little bit, you'll see it's all the way to the right.